Under the warm, golden glow of the chandeliers, Christopher froze at the dinner table. His eyes locked onto three little boys in tuxedos, sitting silently, and looking so much like him, it sent chills down his spine. On the table, an envelope lay open. The words DNA results screamed inside his head. How could I have gone 6 years without knowing I had children? Monica, the woman who had vanished without a word, stared back at him, her gaze cold, yet impossibly deep. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. If these results were real, the empire Christopher had built could crumble. But if he walked away, he'd lose the only thing he could truly call family. He drew a slow breath and opened the paper. To understand what brought me to this moment, we have to go back 10 years. To understand what brought me to that moment, we have to go back 10 years. It was winter in New York City, Scam, the kind of winter that turned the East River into a sheet of glass and painted the skyline in shades of steel and silver. Snowflakes drifted sideways in the wind, clinging to the edges of brownstone steps and dusting the black coats of pedestrians rushing along Fifth Avenue. The city was a living, breathing machine, humming with ambition, steam rising from manholes like the earth itself was exhaling. Christopher Langston was 35 back then, and every inch of him looked like he belonged in the pages of a financial magazine. His suits were tailored on Madison Avenue, his shoes imported from Italy, and his days measured in conference calls and boardroom deals. He was already one of the youngest real estate moguls in the city, a man who could turn abandoned warehouses into billion-dollar skyscrapers with nothing more than a vision and the iron will to see it through. But beneath that polished exterior was something else, something he didn't let the world see. Christopher wasn't just ambitious, he was relentless, almost to the point of cruelty. In chasing success, he had left a trail of broken relationships and burnt bridges behind him. Family gatherings had become rare, phone calls to old friends even rarer. The man who could negotiate a multi-million-dollar contract couldn't manage to keep the people he loved close. That was the first of his past mistakes, thinking there would always be time later, time to apologize, time to rebuild, time to be the man he thought he could be outside the boardroom. But as he would one day learn, time isn't something you can buy back. And then there was Monica Bennett, Monica. She entered his life the way sunlight breaks through a storm, unexpected, almost disarming. Monica was a freelance photographer who saw the world through lenses that made even the mundane seem extraordinary. She wasn't impressed by his wealth or his penthouse view. She cared more about the way snow fell on a fire escape or how streetlights reflected in puddles after a rainstorm. Christopher, who had spent years seeing the city only as a map of properties and profit margins, found himself seeing it anew through her eyes. They met at a charity gala he attended out of obligation, and she covered for a local arts magazine. While he was used to polite smiles and predictable conversations, Monica was different, direct, curious, unafraid to challenge him. She asked questions no one else dared to. Do you ever get lonely in all that space? Or, what was the last thing you did just for the joy of it? Against all odds, they fell in love. Their worlds couldn't have been more different. His measured in quarterly earnings, hers in moments and memories. And yet, for a while, they found a way to meet in the middle. She softened him, pulled him out of the relentless grind. He grounded her, offered stability she'd never had before. But love alone wasn't enough to erase the cracks beneath the surface. Christopher's business was expanding at a pace that devoured his time. Deals in Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles kept him on planes more than at home. Monica, who had built her life around presence and connection, began to feel like a ghost in his world. She tried to tell him. He tried to listen. But in the end, ambition spoke louder than love. One evening in late January, she was gone. No note, no forwarding address, just the absence where she used to be. For weeks, Christopher searched. He called her friends, checked every coffee shop she liked, even hired a private investigator. Nothing. It was as if she had vanished into thin air, and though he would never admit it to anyone, that loss carved a hollow space in him. A wound he carried quietly, even as the city applauded his next big project. Years passed, the empire grew. His name appeared on Forbes lists, his net worth doubled, his properties stretched from coast to coast. Outwardly, Christopher had everything. Inwardly, he had learned to live with the silence until that letter arrived. It was a crisp December morning when his assistant placed it on his desk. No return address, just his name written in Monica's handwriting, a script he recognized instantly even after all these years. Inside was a single card. "Christopher, there's something you need to know. Meet me at the Regent Hotel Friday at 7 p.m. There was no signature, no explanation, just those words. For the first time in years, Christopher felt the sharp, unfamiliar edge of uncertainty. He told himself it was probably nothing. An apology, a goodbye, maybe even a request for money. But deep down, he knew. He didn't know what he knew, only that this meeting would change everything. The days leading up to Friday stretched endlessly. Every sound in his office seemed louder, every conversation blurred at the edges. His thoughts drifted constantly to Monica, where she'd been, what she'd been doing, why now. When Friday finally came, the city was wrapped in snow and holiday lights. The Regent Hotel lobby smelled of pine and cinnamon, with a grand fireplace crackling at its center. Christopher spotted Monica instantly. She looked almost the same steady eyes, the same quiet strength. But there was something different too, something heavier in the way she carried herself. And then he saw them. 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all dressed neatly, all watching him with expressions he couldn't quite read. But the moment he looked into their faces, his heart clenched, because they had his eyes. The air seemed to thin around him. His mind raced through timelines, memories, the impossible math of years lost. Questions pressed at the back of his throat, but before he could speak, Monica reached into her bag and placed an envelope on the table between them. It was identical to the one in the banquet hall years later. DNA results. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. Was this a cruel coincidence, some kind of elaborate joke? Or had his past mistakes come back in the most unexpected and irreversible way? Christopher reached for the envelope, his fingers brushing the paper, but stopped. Whatever the truth was, it would force him to make a choice between the empire he had built and the family he never knew he had. He drew a slow breath, and that was when I realized my life was no longer mine alone to live. But before I could even begin to process it all, one of the kids leaned over and asked me the most ridiculous question I'd ever heard. "Are you Batman?" the boy on my left whispered, as if it were a state secret. His twin brother, seated across from me, immediately added, No, he's Iron Man. Just look at the suit." I blinked at them. Batman? Iron Man? Wow. I've been called a lot of things in business negotiations, but this is a first. The little girl in the middle, clearly the ringleader, leaned forward and said in a tone of deadly seriousness, "Mom says you disappeared like a superhero, only you forgot to come back." I coughed, partly because I wasn't sure what to say, partly because the waiter chose that exact moment to bring me a glass of water I desperately needed. Monica just watched, her lips curving into the faintest, most infuriating smile. She wasn't going to rescue me. Not yet. I decided to roll with it. "Well," I said, adjusting my tie, "if I were a superhero, I'd need a cool team name for you 3. How about the Triplets of Trouble?" The twins grinned. The girl didn't. She folded her arms, her expression pure Monica. "We already have a team name," she said. "It's called Family." And there it was. One word. Family. Hitting me harder than any hostile takeover ever had. I felt the air shift, the ground tilt. My brain was still playing catch-up, but my chest knew what she meant, and that scared me. Before I could answer, the moment was interrupted, violently. A crash erupted from the lobby. Glass shattered. Voices rose in panic. The hotel manager's voice boomed, "Call security!" Everyone turned toward the noise. Through the chaos, I caught a glimpse of a man in a dark coat, sprinting past the dining room entrance. Something about his stride, the way he avoided eye contact, made my stomach knot. I'd seen that man before. "Stay here," I told the kids, a phrase that, in hindsight, never works in movies or real life. And stood to follow. Monica's voice followed me, low and urgent. "Chris, don't..." But I was already moving. The man disappeared into the service corridor behind the kitchen. I pushed through swinging doors, past startled chefs, until I was in the narrow back hallway where the smell of bleach and raw onions mingled. Then I saw it, a folded piece of paper lying on the floor, just in my path. I picked it up. No envelope, no signature, just 5 words, scrawled in black ink. "They're not safe with you." The words hit like a punch to the gut. I spun around, but the man was gone. I stood there, the note crumpling in my hand, my mind racing. If this was some random threat, it was oddly specific. But if it wasn't, then someone knew exactly who those children were, and they wanted me to think I was the danger. Back at the table, Monica was pale. She saw the note in my hand, and her jaw tightened. "I was hoping we'd have more time," she murmured. "More time for what?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "For them to know you," she said simply, glancing at the kids. "For you to know them. Before—" She trailed off, and that silence was worse than any answer. The kids were watching me now, wide-eyed. Whatever this was, they were part of it, whether they understood it yet or not. I tried to lighten the air, even as my insides twisted. "So," I said, forcing a smile, "Batman, Iron Man, and their fearless leader. Anyone here good at solving mysteries?" The twins raised their hands. The girl just stared at me, unblinking. I think she knew, or at least sensed, that this was more than a game. That night, after dinner, Monica refused to let me walk them home. She claimed it was safer this way. That word again, safer, now gnawing at me. I watched them leave in a yellow cab, the taillights disappearing into the snowy street. As soon as they were gone, I called a friend, an old contact, from my less-than-perfect business days. If someone was watching them, I needed to know who, and why. The call lasted less than 2 minutes. My friend's voice was tight. "Chris, whatever you've gotten yourself into, it's bad. That man you saw tonight, he used to work for—" He stopped, as if realizing he'd already said too much. "I'll call you back." He never did. By the next morning, my phone buzzed with a single text from an unknown number. "Meet me, alone, 9 p.m., Pier 17, or they're gone." And that was when I understood. If I failed, I wouldn't just lose the children I'd only just met. I'd lose the one chance to fix the biggest mistake of my life. I went to Pier 17 that night, not knowing if I was walking into a negotiation or a trap. The pier stretched out into the dark water like a finger pointing toward nothing. It was late, the kind of late when the city felt half asleep but still restless, when the sound of the river slapping against the wooden pylons was louder than traffic. A cold wind cut through my coat, slicing across my face. Somewhere out on the water, a foghorn moaned, low, distant, and lonely. Pier 17 had once been a tourist hotspot, but tonight it was deserted. The restaurants were closed, their glass fronts reflecting only the pale glow of street lamps. The smell of salt and diesel hung in the air. Every creak of the wooden boards beneath my shoes felt like a drumbeat, counting down to something. I kept my hands in my pockets, not because I was cold, but because I needed to hide the tremor in my fingers. My mind kept replaying that text. "Meet me, alone." The image of the children's faces flashed like snapshots. The boy's mischievous grin, the girl's unflinching stare. I'd only just met them, yet they'd already rewritten the blueprint of my life. And now someone wanted to rip that away before I could even begin. Halfway down the pier, a figure stepped out from the shadows, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the same dark coat I'd seen in the hotel. "You came," he said, voice flat. No hello, no small talk. "I don't like threats," I replied, keeping my tone steady. "Where are they?" His eyes narrowed, scanning me like a man deciding whether to strike. "Safe, for now." "Define safe," I shot back. "That depends on you, Langston." He took a step closer, and the lamplight caught his face, older than I remembered, with lines carved deep by time and something harder than time. Recognition hit me like a sucker punch. "Baker," I said. "I thought you were, in prison, dead, take your pick." His smile was humorless. Funny thing about the past. It doesn't stay buried, not when it's this profitable. I didn't need him to explain. Years ago, in the early days of my business, Baker and I had partnered on a deal that went south in a way I didn't care to remember. I'd walked away clean. He hadn't. "So this is what?" I asked. "Revenge? Extortion?" "Call it insurance," he said. "Those kids, your children, are leverage, and leverage is worth more than money." I felt my jaw tighten. My children. The word wasn't hypothetical anymore. Somewhere between the hotel and this moment, it had solidified, taken root. Whether I deserved them or not, they were mine, and nobody used them like bargaining chips. "What do you want?" I asked, though I already knew. "A piece of your empire," Baker said. "Not just money, property, access, influence." I laughed, sharp, bitter. "You think I'd sell out everything I've built?" "No," he said, smiling faintly. "I think you'll trade it for them." Silence settled between us, thick as the fog rolling in off the water. I could hear the creak of a rope against a piling, the whisper of waves below. My mind split in two. One side calculating, weighing outcomes, mapping scenarios, the other side screaming that no calculation mattered if those kids weren't safe. And here it was, the edge of the cliff. If I said yes, I'd hand Baker a key to everything. If I said no, I risked losing them forever. Either way, I'd never be the same man I was when I walked onto this pier. For a long moment, I let the silence stretch, forcing him to wait. In that space, I thought about Monica, about the way she'd looked at me across the table, guarded, almost bracing for disappointment. I thought about the children, about their laughter at dinner, about the way the girl had said family like it was something unshakable. And I thought about my past mistakes, the people I'd let slip away because I thought there would be more time. There was no more time. I took a step forward until I was close enough to see the flecks of gray in Baker's stubble. "You touch them, and nothing in this city will hide you from me." He smirked. Big talk for a man outnumbered. "Try me," I said. And then I moved. It wasn't graceful, I'm no action hero, but years of boardroom battles teach you how to take an opening when it appears. I grabbed his coat, shoving him backward into the railing. The wood groaned under the impact. He swung at me, catching my jaw, and stars burst behind my eyes. The scuffle was messy. Grunts, the slap of shoes on wet boards, the clang of metal as we crashed into a mooring cleat. Somewhere, a gull screamed overhead, startled into the night. In the end, neither of us won. He broke away, stumbling toward the far end of the pier, and vanished into the fog. I was left with nothing but the taste of blood and the pounding of my own heart. I leaned against the railing, catching my breath. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice I'd just made. I hadn't given him what he wanted, but that didn't mean the children were safe. The river below lapped at the wood, indifferent. The city lights shimmered on the water, fractured and fleeting. Somewhere out there, they were waiting for me to decide what kind of father I was going to be. And in that cold, breathless silence, I realized the real fight hadn't even begun. And in that cold, breathless silence, I realized the real fight hadn't even begun. I didn't go home that night. Couldn't. Every shadow looked like Baker. Every passing car felt like a threat. I paced the city until dawn, my phone in hand, waiting for the next move. It came at 6:13 a.m. A photo. Grainy. The three kids in the back seat of a black SUV, their faces turned toward the window, confused. No message, no demand, just proof. They could be reached any time. I was moving before I'd even thought it through. Coat on, keys in hand, engine roaring to life. The streets were slick with last night's rain, tires hissing as I pushed through traffic. My mind was a weapon now, firing in bursts. Where they could be, who Baker might use, how much time I had before the trail went cold. Call Monica, straight to voicemail, call my contact, no answer. Every second was a cut deeper. By 8:00, I was at my office, pulling files, digging into properties I owned that Baker could use as hideouts. My assistant stared as I tore through documents, my tie loose, my shirt wrinkled, a far cry from the polished image I'd worn for years. Then, a break. A warehouse on the Brooklyn waterfront, long abandoned, still in my portfolio, perfect for someone who wanted privacy and leverage. I didn't call the police, not yet. This wasn't the kind of situation that survived bureaucracy. I needed speed, precision, surprise. By 8:45, I was inside the warehouse district. The morning fog clung to the asphalt, muffling sound, swallowing light. The air smelled of rust and seawater. I kept low, moving between stacks of shipping crates. A muffled voice drifted from inside. I recognized it instantly. The boy from dinner. "I told you, I'm not scared of you." I edged to the doorway. Inside, the kid sat on a bench, wrists bound loosely. Baker stood nearby, talking to someone I couldn't see. Not alone. I counted to 3 in my head, then stepped inside. "Let them go, Baker." He turned, smile sharp. "You really don't learn, do you?" The second man, taller, cleaner cut, wearing a suit, emerged from the shadows. My stomach dropped. I knew him too. Caldwell, a board member in one of my holding companies, a man I'd trusted. "This isn't just about you," Caldwell said, his voice smooth. "It's about control. We can't have you distracted by sentiment." He glanced at the kids like they were liabilities on a balance sheet. The heat rose in my chest, and for the first time, I didn't think about deals or strategy. I moved. Fast. The world narrowed to motion, my fist catching Baker off balance, his grip loosening on the rope. The twins scrambled free. The girl stayed rooted, eyes locked on Caldwell. Caldwell reached for her. I grabbed him, slamming him against a steel pillar. His head snapped back with a sickening thud. For a moment, everything went still. The kids breathing, my pulse in my ears, the cold air burning my lungs. Then Baker lunged from behind. We hit the ground hard, grappling, rolling across the concrete. I heard the kids shouting. The sound drove me harder. I threw him off, landing a punch that dropped him. "Go!" I barked at the kids. "Run to the car." They didn't argue. I turned back to Caldwell, but he was gone. The warehouse was suddenly too quiet. I backed toward the exit, scanning the shadows. Every instinct screamed this wasn't over. Outside, the fog was lifting. The kids huddled in the back seat of my car, eyes wide, silent. Monica appeared from between 2 buildings, breathless, like she'd been running. She pulled the door open, gathering them close. I climbed behind the wheel, my hands tight on the steering wheel, every muscle coiled. We drove in silence for blocks before the girl spoke. "You came back," she said, not a question, a statement. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "I'm not going anywhere again." For a moment, something warm broke through the cold in my chest, a heartwarming story in the middle of chaos. But it didn't last. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, a video. Caldwell standing in an empty office. My office. He held up a set of keys. "Enjoy your time playing father," he said into the camera, "because while you're busy, we're taking everything else." The screen went black. My grip on the wheel tightened. This wasn't the end. This was the start of a war. I looked at Monica. "We're not safe," she nodded, eyes hard. "Then we fight." The city skyline rose ahead, glass towers catching the morning sun. Somewhere inside those buildings, Caldwell was moving against me. Somewhere in the streets, Baker was nursing his bruises. And in the back seat, my children, the only thing that mattered, were watching. I took a breath, steady, focused. "This," I said, "is only the beginning."